7. Fear is protection just as money is protection. So we see that wisdom wisdom protects us. That fear of God protects us and makes man more capable than 10 rulers. Well, you just pick a number, 10 rulers. Well, you would think that if you're a ruler, that you may have wisdom, right? Wrong answer. Just because you're a ruler doesn't mean that you're wise. I think we all can understand that. I can't remember who said, I used to read a lot of Shakespeare, so maybe, but I don't want to give credit to whoever. It says, some men are born great, some men achieve greatness, and others have greatness thrust upon them. So there are obviously different ways that you can achieve greatness. And so these rulers that Solomon's referring to, doesn't necessarily mean that they're intelligent. They may have achieved their position through no telling what kind of means. Bribery, we've already talked about that earlier. So just because you are a ruler doesn't mean that you're going to be wise. A person who fears God has wisdom and protection, back to verse 12. So we see the goodness of those things. So a person who fears God and has wisdom and protection is far beyond others who may even have achieved a lot of success. Okay, so success comes through your wisdom. Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and never sins. We just continue to see these New Testament references. I mean, here's Solomon. Has anyone said this before in the Scriptures as we come along? Well, I mean, there's no one who continues to do good. What about James chapter 4, verse 7? We know that all men sin. Verse 20, there's not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and never sins. How does the fear of God help one to be a righteous man? Well, we've talked about balance in viewpoint, that you can't be overly righteous, self-righteous. You can't consider yourself too sinful, guilt pressing down upon. We have to have balance. That is a realistic viewpoint. Romans chapter 3 tells us that perfection is what? Easily attained by everyone? No, not attainable at all. We can't do it. Only through the fear of God that motivates us to live as righteously as we can, to be the devout as possible. However, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21 tells us that we can, in fact, be righteous. We can be righteous through God. So therein is the answer to all that Solomon is talking about. He now speaks of a couple of types of sins that we're familiar with. He speaks of the sins of omission. He says there's no one on earth who continues to do good. If we know to do things, as James says, and do not do them, well, that's sins of omission. That's things we should have done that we didn't do. Okay, then the sins of commission, no one who ever sins, there's no one who ever sins, everyone sins. The Scriptures tell us that. Obedience is stressed throughout the commandments, going all the way back to Exodus when he gives the commandments to the Jews, all the way up to, and Jesus said, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So this concept of obedience, is all through the Scriptures, and Solomon refers strongly to this now. Verse 21, also do not take seriously all words which are spoken, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Everything anyone says, You just believe it no matter what? Well, it was on the internet. That's got to be assuredly truth, right? Do not believe everything that you say. Maybe Solomon's even talking about some of the things what about the Bereans? They were more noble. Why? They searched to see if the things that were being said were actually so. You can hear stuff all the time. And people will say, oh, it comes from the Bible, And if you ask them book, chapter, and verse, it's like, well, I'm not sure, but it's in there somewhere. Yeah, right, okay? Just because you say that doesn't mean that it is true. I tested all this with wisdom, and I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. Does wisdom solve everything? You can figure it out. Always you can figure it out, right? You're smart enough, you can figure it out. I don't think so. In harmony with 21, verse 21, don't take everything that you hear seriously, lest you hear your servant cursing you. He says, don't believe all that's spoken. What did he say? He said, I will be wise. But did Solomon accomplish that? End of that verse says, but it was far from me. And he's supposedly the wisest man with the exception of Christ that ever lived. And if he said, I've tried to be wise and I'm going to be wise and wisdom is going to solve all of this, but it was far from me. I couldn't even figure it out. Life without God is futile. And I think Solomon proved that by what we know about him and what things turned out to be. Verse 24, he asks a question with an expected answer. What has been is remote and exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? I'm wise. I've searched so hard. I'm going to try to figure this out. We're writing. I'm looking here. I'm looking there. I'm going to figure it out. But God's plan is beyond man's ability to grasp. Paul even referred to the mysteries that now have been revealed to us. Some of the things that were revealed through the New Testament, through the New Covenant, were not revealed to Solomon. They were in the prophets. They were talked about, but it hadn't been revealed. It hadn't come to place. So man must fear and trust God for the answers. He tried. I directed my mind to know, to investigate, and to seek wisdom and an explanation, and to know the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. New American Standard says, it directed my mind to know. So he's gathering as much information as he possibly can. I'm trying to know everything that I can. Then I'm going to investigate it. I'm not just going to try to know it. I'm going to try to get it in my mind and figure it out. I'm going to investigate all of these things to grasp the scheme of things. This word means to count, to compute, to analyze. So he's trying to figure, he's looking for answers. And to seek wisdom and an explanation and to know. All right, that's the second time he said to know. He started, number 1 was to know, and now number 4 is to know. So if you say it twice, that repetition thing means what? I kind of mean it. It's kind of important. Look at these things. So we see how serious he is about trying to understand this. So he is looking for the folly, the evil of folly and the foolishness of madness. Why is folly so evil? He refers to that all through the book of Ecclesiastes. What's evil about folly? Well, foolishness destroys a man's credibility. Somebody who's acting like a fool and living folly, are you going to really go to that guy for answers about anything? Or are you going to trust the things that he says? No, there are problems there. He doesn't have the ability to influence others to do the right thing and to follow God. It destroys the ability to teach good. So it's evil. Folly is evil. Why is foolishness madness? Well, it involves activity without purpose or sober thought. Well, that's mad. That's madness. It makes no sense whatsoever. Those who act carelessly in total regard for God and man are unconcerned about the damage that they may do. If you're being foolish and if you're acting with folly, then you don't care. And we talk about generational changes, but that's one of the things that I see in the day of today. Nobody cares about you or anyone else. Doesn't appear to be. It's all about me. Don't even bring up traffic or any of that kind of stuff. Nobody will merge and let you in. They honk and curse and everything. And it's like, I'm just trying to pull out on the road and there's nobody in that other lane. All you had to do was that. And 20 people could have gotten out. But we're not going to do that. We're not concerned about this. All right. 26 through the end of this chapter causes a little bit of concern, or at least things to think about. I have discovered more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are chains. One who is pleasing to God will escape from her, but the sinner will be captured by her. A woman can cause such havoc in a man's life that is more bitter than death. If her heart, her intentions to dominate, control, and her hands, her actions, her resources to accomplish her own will, that's what we were just talking about. Concern about herself, not about anyone else. The one who is pleasing, Solomon is speaking from experience. He learned a lesson about pleasing God. Now, this isn't woman bashing or sexist. It's just a male perspective. We talked about when we started this study that Solomon's a man and he has a male perspective. It could be the same thing if you just turned it around from a woman's perspective, that a man can cause so much havoc in a woman's life that is more bitter than death. True enough statement? Okay. Well, he's got a lot of stuff here that is not woman bashing or any of that stuff. They could easily be made by a woman. Some people do not have good motives and try to manipulate others. This could be applicable in any relationship, either other than husband and wife, business partners, whatever. If one's dominating, we've talked about wives controlling and the misery and the hurt and the pain that people who are in charge can put on other people. So I think this is kind of what Solomon is talking about here. Behold, I have discovered this, says the preacher, adding one thing to another to find an explanation. So when he says this, he's adding one thing to another. He is trying to put this puzzle together. He is studying. Discovered is translated as found or find, and it's said 5 times in this little section right here. I'm searching. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm adding one fact to another. I'm putting them together. I'm stacking it together. I'm doing everything I can to figure this out. But what's the old statement? The more you know, what? The more you know that you don't know. So you continue to try to figure it out. His bottom line is it's futile. We're not going to figure it out. We have to trust God, but therein lies the explanation. He's adding one thing to another, but I am still seeking, but have not found. He still hadn't figured it out. Smartest guy around. Smartest guy on the block, okay? And he cannot figure it out. I have found one man among 1,000, but I have not found a woman among all these. Okay, anybody want to take that one on? This is way big, okay? Way big. And a lot of commentators have told given a bunch of good ideas. Seems to be a pretty negative view of mankind. We're just going to take a little bit of time to talk about this. The first thing that popped in my mind is, all right, when you get to let me drop this one in first. When we get to chapter 12, the chapter 12 is almost like speaking in a second tense, whatever I'm trying to say. Another person is writing that last little piece. Well, I assume that Solomon, with all of his resources, probably was not sitting writing this stuff himself. He probably had at least one man, and maybe he did not want to say, I hadn't found a single man that's worth, if he's got this guy here working for him. It could have been that he said, I hadn't found but one guy, and it's you. Now that's just one of my thoughts. Luster, you had a comment? I think you're absolutely correct. I find it ironic that with the wives and the concubines, they added up to be 1,000. He could have just as easily said, I've looked for 100 men and I hadn't found, or I looked at 500 women. I looked at 739. No, he said 1,000, and that's how many wives he had. Okay. Another thing, and I don't want this to be too base or whatever, but it's just the facts. From a man's point of view, 1,000 wives could be kind of intriguing, okay? I doubt that's the same perspective from women. Very much so. There's more to relationships than the physical aspect. As we all know, there's much more to marriage and relationships than just sex, okay? There's more than that. Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. He built her a palace. What about those other 999? You think they wanted a palace? Well, she's got... Why don't I? There were books and movies made about King Solomon's mines. Whether or not they were there, we know he had mines, gold, silver, jewelry. You don't think they wanted any of that if he gave it to one? So, man, oh man. Well, and they were pressing Solomon, I'm sure, just as it happens in relationships. Luster, you had something else? What happened to him? He is speaking from experience. He's talking about himself. Yes, sir. Well, and we've discussed that earlier when he said that riches bring people from everywhere. We made mention of, someone that wins the lottery. Man, everybody that ever knew that person shows up knocking on the door saying, "Hey, old buddy, man, my partner, remember me?" When you got money, you got lots of friends. But that can go away quickly. Yes, ma'am. Oh, and when we get into the next chapter, I assure you, this is not woman bashing. He is looking at society and he is trying to figure out. One of the things that also jumped out to me is, what about that crooked road and that big old wide gate? How many find that? A lot. What about that little narrow, straight way and the narrow gate? How many find that? Maybe 1 out of 2,000. I mean, that just popped in my mind. And what if the one good man that he is referring to, what if this is a reference to Jesus out of the whole world? Solomon thinks way far out of the box, okay? So you never know. This is a very, very upright, very encouraging section. Behold, I have found only this, that God makes men upright, but they have sought out many devices. That goes all the way back to, indeed, there's not one righteous man on earth, back up to verse 20. He begins with a section with that, and he ends that I have only found this. People, he's talking about mankind, not man, when he says, behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright. He said so in Genesis. Everything God made was good. It's man that has sought out evil. It has man that has the practice of evil. It's evidence of lack of wisdom. That's what Solomon keeps talking about. Hosea said in 4:6, my people are lost because of a lack of what? If you don't know, if you're not smart, it takes wisdom. Solomon can't figure it out. It's stacked on, stacked on, stacked on. That's why we're going to end this whole thing with trusting God, because he's the one in control, okay? Psalm 7 and 10, my shield is with God who saves the upright in heart. Mankind is given a choice. It's in the heart of fools to devise the schemes of men. Okay, let's go into chapter 8. Maybe. Chapter 8 kind of seems to be a continuation of chapter 7, but there's not a real clear connection. He continues looking at wisdom, but introduces a new discussion of a relationship with those in power. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illuminates him and causes his stern face to beam. As I looked at it, I don't know what other translations say, but it doesn't say in this New American Standard, who is a wise man? It says, who is like a wise man? Well, I guess if you're like a wise man, maybe you are a wise man, but I just, that jumped out at me for some reason. Who is like a wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? Well, what's the answer to that? Wisdom. That's what he's been talking about. That's how you know the interpretation of a matter is through wisdom. A man's wisdom illuminates him and causes his stern face to beam. We see that every day. You're looking at something and you got this look on your face, and then when you figure it out, what? Oh, yeah. So we see that that physical attribute here that he's talking about. I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Oath before God? Well, Solomon's king number 3, Zedekiah, I think was the last one. He was taken into Babylonian captivity, and he was given forced by Nebuchadnezzar to make an oath before God that he would follow the king and that he would do the things that the king said, which Zedekiah did not do. It's referred to the second time in Ezekiel chapter 17 that this oath was taken. So we've already talked about in the previous chapters about keeping an oath, doing what you say you're going to do. Solomon's addressed that already. Don't make a promise to God and then not do it, even if it was a good thought and you didn't pull it off, didn't do it, and you just decided to say, well, it was a good thought. He just didn't get around to it. No. That's not what God wants. He doesn't want you to have a good thought. I mean, he wants you to, but he wants you to follow through with it. If you're going to make an oath or make a vow, you got to do what you said you were going to do. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Don't be disloyal. Do not be disloyal. Don't leave. Don't join evil against the king. The king is going to make this person pay. He's going to do whatever he pleases. What's the king going to do? Hey, chop that guy's head off. Throw that guy in a lion's den. Put him on the gallows. Whatever a king is going to be in charge. Verse 4, since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? Who's going to walk into the king and say that? Hey man, that's crazy. What are you doing? Nobody wants to do that. When a king says do, what do? You do it. What was the old saying? If the king says jump, all you say is, how high do you want me to jump? If the king says what to do. Boom, 1 Samuel chapter 8. We want to be like all the people around us. We want a king. We don't want you, Samuel. We don't want God to be our king. We want a king. What'd Samuel say? All right, here's what's going to happen when you get a king. First thing, your sons, he's going to take all them, put them in an army. They're going to have to go out and fight and die. All your crops and all that stuff, he's going to take whatever he wants out of that. Samuel was telling them that from Jump Street, right from the beginning. And what is Solomon saying? A king's going to do whatever he wants to do. He's in control. He's authoritative. Since the word of the king is authoritative, so I looked back and said, let's go back now and insert God instead of king and see what we get. Since the word of God is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? I say, verse 2 is where I meant to go back to. I say, keep the command of God because of an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave God. Do not join in an evil matter, for God will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of God is authoritative, who will say to God, what are you doing? That works, doesn't it? Think Solomon may be talking about that as well? Well, it works. And who is the king? Who is authoritative? Who is the top of that chain? God. So we can easily see a lot of things that Solomon here is talking about. He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. Oh, wow. There's a time for what and there's a time for what? Remember all of that? We've already talked about that. There's a proper time. Every citizen is subject to some law somewhere. When I was in graduate school at North Texas State, That's what it used to be called. It's now University of North Texas. I studied a bunch of anthropology. And my teachers lived in the Amazon with a bunch of primitive people and lived in the Aboriginal stuff in New Guinea and Australia. Every society, no matter how big it is or how small it is, has social rules. There are laws. There are things that are acceptable. There are things that are not acceptable. You know, there are tribes called the Bushmen in Africa that are very, very small, and if somebody doesn't obey the rules, they just ostracize them. Nobody talks to him. Nobody looks at him. He can't eat, can't have any other water, can't have just, How you think that works? Pretty good. So everybody, no matter who, what, where, or when, you have to live by rules. You have to know the law. You have to obey the law. What does this do? It keeps you out of trouble with the king. It also keeps you out of trouble with God. If you we continue to insert God instead of king when we come down the list. We see already that there is a time for everything under the sun, chapter 3. And there is a time and procedure. Even with our law, what happens on April 15? And if you don't pay them on time, what about permits that we have to do? So a lot of us in business have permits that we have to file with the state and file with the Fed, whatever. What if you don't do those on time? That letter with that big red stamp on it, so there's a proper time. Even things under the law, there's a time for everything in God's plan and in man's plan. Be patient, proper time to stay out of trouble here, for there is a proper time procedure for every delight when a man's trouble is heavy on him. If you do these things on time, what do? You stay out of trouble. Maybe he's saying be patient until this bad ruler is gone. There's a time for that. Maybe he'll just die, or somebody will kill him, or someone else will be in his place. You should try to be happy even in bad times. Do even go to the book of Philippians to talk about that. Joy, 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 14, 15 times, written by a man who's in prison. So here's a guy who could find joy. And don't add to your trouble by rebelling against the king, rebelling against God. That's not going to help. That is not going to help. Okay, verse 7. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? How many times has he asked that question? A bunch. He's steady looking at, who's going to know what happens next? Well, here's a thought I had. Not in a commentary, so you may not want to pay any attention to this, but if you knew the future, if you knew you were going to hell, you done gotten a letter from up above that says, hey, bro, you going. No matter what you do, you're going to hell. I expect I'd be rocking and rolling. I'd have the hammer cocked back. I'd be like Solomon. I'd do anything and everything I wanted to do. If I knew I was going to hell anyway, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you exert every pleasure that you could possibly think of if you knew you were going to hell? That's knowing the future. What if you got that same letter that says you're going to heaven? No matter what you do, you're going to heaven. Really? I think I'm going to do all of those same things. If you know you're going, if you knew the future, and there's not going to be any retribution. So this concept of Solomon steady saying, who knows what comes next? Who knows what's going to happen? Who can tell us what's going to happen? Well, what that does, it eliminates faith. It eliminates obedience, which is wisdom. It would allow evil to prevail, even from those who knew they were going to hell and from those who knew they were going to heaven. Evil would prevail throughout the whole world. What does Judges say? 2 times. Had no king. Had no God. So people did what? Whatever they wanted to do. So that's what we see. So now then, how important does faith and obedience become? Boy, that changes the whole program, doesn't it? Absolutely. Solomon, very wise guy, asked a lot of good questions. So, we got consequences versus reward. How fast do you drive down the freeway if there's no sign that says speed limit and there are no highway patrol? How fast do you drive? Let's see how fast this bad boy will go. So no consequences versus reward. Bottom line, fear God. Verse 8, no man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or authority over the day of death, and there is no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. Man can't control the wind. How are we going to control the wind? Stop the wind from blowing? I mean, man, oh man, how many shows have we been to, Amy, with Blueswood, when there would be tents and people put up the tents and they've got these great pieces of art and china and glass and whatever, furniture. And you got these sandbags and you put them all around these things, and when the wind comes, decides it's going to blow, what's going to happen? All that stuff is gone. Man can't control the wind. That's obvious. End of story, okay? Man cannot control natural death. You don't know when you're going to die. We've already talked about that. We have no control over that. No discharge in the time of war. When I first read that, it's like, no discharge. You're talking about no guns, no fire? No furlough, no discharge. Nobody in the time of war, your sergeant or your captain's not going to say, well, now would be a good time for you to take a little R&R, right? Here comes the... No, nobody gets that during a time of war. There is no discharge in the time of war. It translates in the time of war. So maybe we're talking about life and death. We've already said man can't control his death, so maybe there's no discharge, there's no relief, there's no R&R in this battle that we're in. Again, we get 2 views here. You can't get out of trouble by sinning, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. You tell a lie, how you get out of that? Well, just tell another lie. You do something crazy with money, so now you decide, I'm just going to have to go steal something to try to solve that problem. You kill one person and somebody saw you, so now you got to kill them. So, you're not going to solve your problems by continuing to steal or to continue to sin. Evil will not help you overcome death. It's not going to get us out. It's appointed to man once, Hebrews 4. It's going to happen to everybody in this room unless the Lord comes prior to that happening. We don't like to talk about that, but we need to be ready for it. That's what Solomon is trying to get us ready for. They all, to me, appear to be related to death, definitely a man's limitations. Our best alternative is to submit humbly to the will of God. All right, verse 9, all this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed which has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. So we are looking at this same concept of someone in authority, and he has seen it. He has applied his mind to everything that he can figure out. Continuation of authority introduced in verse 1, when a man has authority over another to misuse their powers. Man does not have that authority. What did Jesus tell Pilate in John chapter 9, verse 11, I wrote down? He said, you know, you didn't have any authority over me whatsoever unless God had given it to you. That's what Jesus told Pilate. You got no authority over me. God has put this plan in place. He's the one who's given you authority. So ultimately, where does all authority come from for anything? From God. He is in control. Man has no authority over another. Unfortunately, however, he says, I've looked at every deed that has been done under the sun when a man has exercised authority. So, his theme returns again to injustice, those in power hurting and causing pain, grief, and aggravation to those who are under them, okay? And he sees that sometimes evil people receive the things that should have gone to the righteous, and vice versa. And trying to figure that out and to understand it, we're not going to be able to do it, y'all. We're not going to be able to figure out. So then I have seen the wicked buried, and those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did this. This, too, is futility. This is the 18th vanity that he talks about. Commentators consider this to be one of the most challenging ones. To me, the wicked seems to be a focus on the ones in authority here. They're going in and out of the holy place. Maybe we're talking about priests or whatever, in and out of the holy place. Their deeds, however, are wicked. Perhaps they're oppressing the people, even though they receive an honorable burial and everybody is there and they have the big pomp and circumstance and the horses are pulling the wagon and all of that, and everybody hated that guy, but he's the king, he's in authority, so he's got this big funeral going down. What happens when he goes in the ground? It's not long till everybody forgets about all of the stuff that went down. No one remembers or holds them accountable for their deeds. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sum of men among them are given fully to do evil. Because God doesn't act right away, because retribution comes, we have to be patient for the end. What if God had treated all of the evils and the priests like he did with Nadab and Abihu? I expect the priesthood would have been pretty clean, wouldn't it? Those who were going in and out of the holy place. They brought the strange fire. Fire came out, consumed them. They're dead, they're gone. So let's bring the next set in. What kind of fire are you going to bring? Whatever you said do is what I'm going to do. I just saw. But because we live our lives, some, we don't, but those who are outside the realm of wisdom of God, because retribution isn't immediate, Ananias and Sapphira, another example, we think, well, it's not going to happen. The Thessalonians who were planning on the day of judgment coming right away, and they're saying, well, it hadn't happened. Well, what's happening here? I thought you said it was fixing to happen. Well, there's a time and a place, right? We've studied that. Okay, no one, the wicked man in verse 10 believed nothing would be done about his wickedness, so people keep on being wicked. If God had continued to deal with them in an immediate way, maybe things would have changed. Romans 3, we're not going to get through with this, so let's go ahead and look at these verses. See what this says. Romans 3. This is from Psalms. Romans 3, verse 10. As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. Wait a minute. What? Out of 1,000? There's no one who understands. There's no one who seeks for God. They have all turned together and become useless. There's none who does good. There's not even one. Continuing. Their mouth is an open grave. We see this same attitude here of people not being held accountable for their actions immediately, so they think it's not going to happen. What about 2 Peter 3? 2 Peter 3, verse 3. Know this, first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking and following after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. Drop down to verse 9. The Lord is not slow about his promises, some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come repentance. So why is retribution not coming so quickly? He's given us a chance to do right. God wants all men to be saved. So he's not in a hurry to come and condemn the world. He wants everyone to do right, to not follow after evil. Okay, verse 12. Oh, I didn't keep my place. That's pretty quick, wasn't it? Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. All right, so this follows along with 2 Peter. The life of the sinner is still on Solomon's mind. It's not about one or two sins, it's about hundreds of sins. And continuing his long life, what's he still going to have to do? Even with a long life and even with 100 sins, he's going to have to pay. He's going to have to stand before the judgment. And all things, every single act is going to be brought before God. The tragedy here is self-deception. We've talked about that. We're fooling ourselves. We either fool ourselves or we lie to ourselves. Solomon may be focusing on his own life, but the bottom line is those who fear God openly will receive the reward. Okay, we got 4 verses to go, and Mickey's hand is saying, no, no, no. Let's stop right there. We'll start with verse 13 next week, and we will do chapter... Wait. Wrong chapter. Yeah, we'll start with 14. We do have 4 verses. I was right about that. There's a futility which is done on the earth. We will start talking about that controversy over will the sinner lengthen his life or will they not lengthen his life. Solomon's going to end this all up. Fearing God, he talks about us being happy. He wants us to be happy. We'll talk more about that. It's time for me to stop. I'm not ready to stop, but it's time for me to stop. There's a time for everything, and it's time for me to stop.